Hi, today I'm talking to Utsav Mamoria, who's a director at a marketing research firm, and he chose to change the course of his life a few years ago. He decided to intentionally slow it down, and he decided to live with intentionality. This realization changed the course of his life. He traveled differently, spending a month at one location, exploring it slowly. He shared some of those experiences through his podcast, Postcards from Nowhere, which went on to become Spotify's global top 2% shows. He started writing long form essays on Substack about adulting, and to make it visual, he also started with sketching and painting. As he matured as a creator, he started the 6% Club with a friend to help full time working professionals get started as creators. He also started working on improving his health through exercise and better food. In the process, he has curated a life which is busy with nice things, things he loves doing. And he had to say no to a lot of pursuits to do the things that he likes at the slow and steady pace that he likes. This is his story. Okay, Utsav, great to have you here. And why don't we start with you giving us a very quick background introduction about yourself and this very interesting journey that we'll be talking about today?
Hey Rahul, thanks for having me. And even before I introduce myself, I want to talk about something I did about 6-7 years ago in 2018. Is when I took a sabbatical, and not because I was frustrated with work or I was burnt out, I was tired, but it's just something I wanted to do. So I took 3 months off, and I traveled solo. I spent a month in Bosnia Herzegovina. I spent a month in, most of it in Armenia, a little bit of it in Georgia, and I also spent a month in a village in Hamta. So this is not Hamta Pass. This is Hamta, about an hour from Manali, and trying to live very very simply in a one room, cottage, like one mattress, one chair, one light bulb kind of a thing, and just try to see how it feels to live like that, and what effect does it have on me. And those 3 months were I feel almost like a very interesting experience, because it really made me think about who I am as a person, and what do I like to do, and what do I enjoy, and what is important to me. Uh, and in that sense, it was a very defining thing for me to do, and I'm glad I did, because it put me on a journey which, in many ways, changed the course of my life for better.
Awesome, awesome. So, what was the background which led to this? Because was it burnout? Was it something else? Like, what was the lead up of the events?
So the lead up of the events was actually not burnout. I actually quite liked where I work, and I liked the work I did. I liked the people there. What was that I had been traveling on and off regularly for the last 6-7 years, taking vacations. But every time I felt, that these 2 weeks are not enough,
Yeah.
because I always felt that I just got like, a very tiny flavor of the place I was going to.
Hmm.
And by the time I understood the things I liked and what I wanted to do, the trip was over.
Yeah.
And I felt that if I had more time, I'd be able to, enjoy my vacation a lot more. And I said a good way to do it is that not have a ticking clock in the
Hmm.
back of my head when I am on vacation, but just to have a more extended period of time in my life.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that was really the big reason to this sabbatical. And kudos to my organization then. They were supportive, and we sort of worked out something which worked for the both of us. And I just came back and rejoined the same organization, the same role. So
Right.
nothing really changed
Hmm.
for me. And I feel that the reason I wanted to travel like that is also because over time I started to realize that when you're traveling fast, what you remember and retain from your experience is very little.
Hmm.
And for me, the best value of any travel experience is that can you talk about it 5 years later? Do you actually remember enough from it to talk about it 5 years later? Because memory is fickle, it decays very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And the realization I had in that period was to say that if you actually start slowing down and have the ability to stay still and observe and absorb a place, the quality of what you feel and remember is much better. And to me, that has a lot of value in terms of travel.
So it's not just spending a long period of time, but also traveling in a slightly different way, if I'm understanding it right. So what's the difference? So say instead of a week exploring, say, 10 places within the location, you are spending a month and exploring 30 places, or is that incorrect?
That is actually not how I do it. I
Right.
would probably spend a month and still see 10 places. Like typically, if I am taking a month off to a place, I would not like to go to more than 4 or 5 places,
Right.
because for me, the day one is just sort of getting oriented to the place and getting a sense of how this place is, what is interesting, what is not. And the difference is that when you are trying to do something on a shortened period of time, so let's suppose you want to see 3 things in a day, uh, even before you have finished seeing the first place, you're thinking about going to the second place.
Yeah.
Because in your head, you're thinking logistics. Oh, I need to catch this metro. I need to get off here, take this ticket, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. Now, what happens is that it actually makes poor the quality of the experience you're having in that moment. Now, what happens is that I'll give you an example from another trip. So I was in Florence, and I saw the Duomo for the first time, and it absolutely blew my mind. I'm in love with that monument. And we were supposed to, leave the next day somewhere to live in the Tuscany countryside. And we changed our plans because we just fell in love with the Duomo, both my wife and I. And we just went again the second day to see the exact same thing. Now, for me, this was 2019. I'm talking about it 6 years later, and it still makes me so happy that I took that decision. Because I wanted to sit and think about the story of the guy who built what was called the impossible dome then, because nobody believed that a dome in a dome structure can be built, and that was, a marvelous thing at that point in time. And to immerse myself in that story, to keep recollecting it over time, to just imagine and appreciate that man's genius, I needed time. I wanted to understand and appreciate some of the details. Now, if I had been constantly thinking, I need to get to the next place, I need to get to the next place, I wouldn't have been able to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And what that really comes from to say is the acceptance that there are infinite things in the world to see. You neither have enough time nor enough money. Let's suppose you even have enough money, you definitely don't have enough time
Yeah.
to be able to see it. So whatever you should see it with a depth and an intensity that you remember it. And for me, that has really been the shift. So it's not about saying that I will cover more places if I have more time. It's to say that I will go to the same place and spend more time and absorb it better if I have more time.
So let's go back to those first 3 months of solo travel, right? And today in our conversation, we are going to focus on some of the changes that you have incorporated in your life since then. So talk about that process, like what really happened in that trip, and how do you feel that you have transformed as a human being from that trip?
Okay, I think the first big realization for me was that there is no one singular way to live life. I feel as an Indian growing up in India as a millennial, there are certain things which were told to us that this is what a good life looks like. And I very diligently followed that good life. I took up an engineering degree, even though I was very bad at it. And very soon realized it and thankfully moved out of it. I did complete my degree, but then I, went to a communication school to study everything that the engineering degree could not teach me. And
Yeah.
of course, changed my career tracks and so on. But for me, that was a big realization because as I saw and met people, uh, across different countries, uh, everything for me shifted, because the idea of success, the idea of what is a good life, the idea of what is a meaningful life was different for different people. And it has nothing to do with how much money you make or how much privilege you have in life. I mean, I met people who had less privilege and were happy, and I met people who had a lot of privilege and were still happy. So that was the first big shift which happened for me, that there are 1,000 ways to live life, and you don't have to follow a set path or a formula or follow another path which has been set by someone else. And somewhere the realization started to kick in that, okay, I need to define my own path. So
Yeah.
that shift was critical for me, because I remember I was hiking in to Mount Obelisk. It is one of the tallest mountains in Bosnia, and I met a couple who I thankfully found, because I would have been so lost on that hike otherwise. I had no idea. I was just like, let's wing it. It's a day hike. What is the big deal, kind of a thing. And I met them, and this person, he was an engineer. He used to work for the electricity company in Serbia. And he used to come back from work at 4, and especially in the summers, go hiking for 4 hours every day.
Wow.
Every day. So he lived in a place where they had access to the mountains, and he would just go hiking for 4 hours every day. And I remember when I was hiking behind him, that man was literally running up and down the mountain. And I was like, I did not sign up for this. What is this like? Can you just slow down? Thankfully, his partner, who was walking with me, she was walking like a regular person and normally. And I think of him, and in my conversation, I realized he was 50 years old.
Wow.
I was what, maybe 32, 33 something. And that just told me that this guy clearly loves the life he lives. And he is not trying to chase, money. He's satisfied with where he is. And he's consciously chosen to prioritize that a life which has hiking involved every day, being in nature, pushing yourself physically, having the time to slow down and discover things, going on the same trail and discovering new things is what he likes doing. And my misfortune and fortune that they decided to take a very binding path, which I was not prepared for. I was dying at the end of it. They were so kind. They had dark chocolate for me. They had magnesium tablets. They had all sorts of recovery things for me, which somehow I managed to make it by the end of the day back to where I was staying. And that single experience for me was very, mind opening, in the sense, because when I was in Armenia after that, I was in this region of Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a disputed region between Armenia and Azerbaijan. In 2020 or 2021, there was actually a war which also happened between the two. And then this was complete chance, and this is what you do when you have a lot of free time and you're not bound by schedule. In 2009, I was in Singapore. I was in an exchange program at NTU. And I got a chance to go to Cambodia in the summer break because there was nothing else to do. And cheap tickets, thanks to low-cost airlines, is a blessing. And there I visited a person who has been removing landmines from the border. And there was another organization called Halo Trust, which is a UK-based organization, which was sort of, helping him do that work. And I found the Halo Trust office also in Armenia. And I had seen their work in the past, and I was like, I really admired the work they do, because demining is such a critical process to make people's land accessible to them and lives back on track. And I just decided that I'll just go into their office and make a small donation and come out. The interesting thing was that as I landed up in their office, they were so confused because they had never had a tourist walk in. And it just like changed the course of their day, because I could see the energy change in the office. They called, the head of the facility. He talked to me. He was an interesting guy. He was a British guy who had spent time on demining projects in Afghanistan, who spoke Pashto a little bit. And he told me that if you are here tomorrow or day after tomorrow as well, please come down again. We will take you to show how demining is done. I was like, this is insane. But I was also know that I am going to do this because this is probably the safest way I can go to a landmine, right? Like with all safety protocols. So they drove me 2 hours to where they were anyways going to visit. They took me, gave me an entire tour. And what happened there was that they showed me the demining process. I spoke to the deminers. And one of the things he told me was that there are people who are deminers today who have themselves lost their family members through mines, through conflict on this region, and so on. And my question was that how can you choose to do this work when this very thing has taken away a family member? And a few months ago, they had an accident where they lost one of their deminers. One of the things with the deminers, one of the deminers told me has just like been seared into my brain, is that the more you hold on to the past, it will kill your present and it will kill your future. And this is not someone just being philosophical for the sake of it. Oh, let me be profound and say, this is a person who has really lost something very important to them in life. And I'm getting goosebumps as I'm thinking about that experience and speaking about it. And for me, that was a very significant moment because I'm like, how is this person able to dissociate so much? And he just said that you have to move on from wherever you are. You can't let all that baggage continuously sit with you and not allow you to move through, because even the person who you lost would not have liked to see you the way you are. And more such conversations, more such experiences in this time made me realize that I'm a prisoner of my own problems. It's so many of my problems with so much privilege I've just created them for myself. And if someone who's gone through so much can move out of it, take a more objective view of what could be helpful for them, because those jobs, of course, paid well, right? So there is an economic angle to it very clearly. I can probably try to live a better life, which I define for myself, and not be always caught up and hung up with, these things. Sorry, I have no idea where I started, where I have gone, but
But it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I was getting goosebumps as well as you were talking about it. So before this recording, when we had all these discussions, right, you articulated the philosophy beautifully in using two phrases. One is slow living, and the other one is intentionality. And what was that eureka moment like? That happened, that finally led to this self-articulation that you want to proceed with a life of intentionality and live it slowly.
So I don't think it was a eureka moment necessarily, but it was a bit of a slow realization dawning over me with everything. So once I returned from that sabbatical, I came back and I went on a friend's podcast, who, by the way, happens to be now my co-founder at the 6% Club. And he said, come talk about your sabbatical, how your experience was and everything. I said, okay. And then I went again a couple of times to talk about budget travel on an Indian budget, because people often say, oh, $100 budget a day is good. But I'm like, listen, $100 is a lot of money in India, right? Not everybody has that kind of a budget to travel, and so on. And then one of the producers sitting in the studio said that, you're clearly passionate about travel and you really like it. Why don't you start a podcast of your own on travel? And I was like, dude, I have no idea about podcasting. And his answer was, you have done 5 episodes. So I think you've gotten some idea of it. And that is when I realized that, why am I self-rejecting? Someone is giving me an option to say, hey, why don't you try this? And I'm like, no, I cannot do it. I'm like, why? And I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. It took a little while. It took a few months of going back and forth with the studio. And I did start my podcast in October 2019. And initially, it felt like you were shouting into the void because nobody's listening to it. Of course, your friends are nice, kind, supportive, they listen to it. But after 2 episodes, they're also like, "Oh yeah, I'm not going to listen to this anymore. It doesn't make sense. It's not something I like," and which I'm perfectly okay with now. Uh, and over time, it started to pick up. It started to get people tuning in. I used to once in a while get a message on Instagram saying that, "Hey, I listened to this episode. This was very nice. I enjoyed it," etc., etc. And I decided only going to commit to doing 1 episode a week. Very short format, 10 minutes, scripted. Everything is in control. I'm the only one responsible for it, so that I'm able to do it. Because the more I add people to this, guests to it, it becomes complicated, on so many fronts. As you would have realized running a podcast, right?
Yes.
So I did that, did it for year 1, did it for year 2. And the other realization I had during this time is that whatever you're doing in your life, most people around you are most likely not going to get what you're trying to do, especially if you're trying to stray away from the path. And in 2019, starting a podcast did feel like straying away from the path. It was nowhere near as popular as it is today. But you have to realize that there is always a tribe of people who will find you for doing what you are doing. And that was a very interesting realization for me, because I said, oh, so I don't need to actually worry about saying, will more people like it? Is this mass enough? Will it have thousands and thousands and millions of people liking it? I'm like, no, wait. Even if I have a few thousand people who like what I do, that is an idea of success. And that actually helped a lot, because I said, and to achieve this success, I actually don't need to do too much. I don't need to go insane and, start putting out 3 episodes a week and start promoting it crazily over social media, trying to do content which the algorithm loves and so on. I said, I want to create for people who probably have a similar way of thinking as me. And that is important to me. Now, that happened. Meanwhile, Spotify reached out through a partner of theirs, and we set up a 6-month program where we help first-time podcasters, do 10, 15 episodes and get them started and so on. It was called, I think, Anchor Spotify Podcast Lab or something. And that again gave me the exposure of saying that, oh, wait, I'm getting paid for my skills, right? So that also said that typically everyone who does content today thinks that brand sponsorships or advertising money is how you monetize. But I was like, wait, first of all, I did not even want it to monetize. It just happened. Second, I realized that all the effort and the work you do in something you enjoy also gives you a reputation. So I came up with the term, what I like to call reputational monetization, saying that it's your skill and the ability more than the audience which people are willing to pay you for. And that, of course, became a way for me to think about how do I want to be a creator and show up as a person. So that also sort of gave me even more freedom and liberation, because when you internalize the idea that nobody actually cares what you are doing, everybody's obsessed with themselves, everybody has this, what I like to call central character energy, that I am the central character, the world revolves around me. It's a very liberating thing, because I'm like, I can do whatever I want now. I can do a 12-episode series on Bosnia and Herzegovina, where most people have never even thought of visiting the place. And I can choose to not talk about where to go, what to eat, and what to do, but talk about how this place has become the way it is today. What is the story of this place? What is it that I have personally found interesting in this? And I can geek out. And I can go into rabbit holes which only I find interesting. And along the way, you discover that, oh, there are other people also who find these things interesting. There are also other people who are also kind of annoyed with the massification and the formulaic way of traveling and rushing from one place to the other. So that again was, a very liberating feeling, because with every experience, my idea of success and the definition of it started to change. Then literally, I think maybe a couple of years ago, even lesser than that, through the studio I was working with, IBM Podcasts, I got an opportunity to co-host, conceptualize a podcast for a venture capital firm with a stand-up comedian. Right? Those are the two worlds I would never thought would intersect. And I had a great co-host. She's a brilliant comedian, and I'm very glad I got a chance to work with her. And in that process, I just said, okay, I did what I wanted to do. I enjoyed doing it. I got some decent amount of money out of it, and I don't have to live with all the hang-ups of people trolling you on social media, because the beauty of doing what you like to do is that most people don't have a shit to give. Second is, if you're trying to do something deep, all the people who love trolling don't have time to consume anything deeply. They are like, let me find the next superficial thing and give my hot take. And you don't have to worry about that, because I'm like, nobody's going to look at it anyways. And those who did were thoughtful people who wrote back to me, and I got a chance to talk to them about things, sometimes even meet them in person if we happen to be in the same city, and so on. So the entire process of going through those, and it's been a little over 5 years now, was that it started reprogramming my brain in terms of what is the kind of life I want to live, what my idea of success is, and why it is even more important in this day and age to define what success is for you.
And are you generally a person who loves to geek out and go down rabbit holes?
100%. I am a total geek. Like, I am unapologetically the person who loves going down rabbit holes and having 80% of my bookshelf unread, because I also think of books like medicine, saying that you should have all the right medicines in the medicine cabinet, because you will never know what you need, and then when you need it, you should have it. Right? So I justify all these things in my head by coming up with all these analogies and metaphors. So yeah, I just leaned on to my curiosity as a person, and I said, this is how I like to travel, this is how I like to create, and this is what I am going to do. Whoever comes along the way, that's great.
But you would have felt slightly compelled, if not now, then at least during your initial days, to try and cater to the algorithm.
No, the beauty of podcasting is that because this was audio only and this was not on YouTube, there is no algorithm in podcasting. Right? There is no feed in which people get served up podcasts. You have to discover a podcast through multiple ways, through recommendations and so on. And what I've realized is that a person referring a podcast to you is the strongest signal they are sending to the person they are referring it to, and to you as a creator, to say that I value this. Because when we share things with someone, we are actually putting our social capital at stake. We are really saying that, listen, I am so smart, I am so good, I gave this to you. That's what sharing is really about in the content and the social media space, and not always necessarily that how much value you are going to get out of it as the person who's going to receive it. So I actually never fell in the trap, because I was a complete novice. I don't come from a background of any sort of creation in the past. The medium was new. Nobody was interested in doing it at that point in time. It was a bit of a shot in the dark kind of a thing. So there was zero expectations from anybody and from myself, and that is freeing. And that is freeing to the extent that you are like, yes, I will geek out on how the food in India in this particular state has been influenced by Y. That's it. That's what the episode is going to be about.
It reminds me of a little story about my own journey. Fortunately, I started with YouTube. It's one of those platforms which is less compelling you to post something every day. Maybe with shorts now it is. But when I started, I made five or six videos. Like, that was the first thing which I had done after I had started my own business 5 years ago. And I posted that, and I was done with it. And then I was like, nobody in the world is going to care about my videos. It was a very difficult process to put my face in front of the camera for the first time. I used to hate the way I sound. I still do. And I had this janky little setup wherein, I was like, I'm not spending any money on this. So I used a very old camera which I had, and then it did not have a screen which would flip and I could see myself. So it was like, I put a mirror on the back so that I could see what I am, if I'm sitting on the right spot or not. So I did all of that setup, and then work took over, life took over. I had a business which I had just started, and I completely forgot about it. And then a month or a month and a half later, I suddenly, after finishing a project, I remembered that what happened to those YouTube videos which I had posted. And until then, I had never uttered a single word to anyone in this world that, I am trying to create YouTube videos, not posting it on any channels, not telling anyone about it. And when I did that, I noticed that there were 100 subscribers, like a little more than 100 subscribers. I was like, who on earth would want to watch these videos, right? And without me ever having told anyone. So that was my first step. And after that, it was a journey of falling for the algorithms, which, which went, and it took me into the creative world. It took me into the creator economy. It took me into listening to all the possible advice, trying to apply everything that I had learned as a marketeer into it. At one point, I was just way too tired and I stopped giving a shit. And I'm like, now I don't care anymore. I'm going to just focus on doing what I do. And whenever I want to do, whenever I'm ready with something good to share, that's when I'm going to share. So yeah, so interesting journey how you managed to resist the entire temptation.
Because I was not even thinking about video, and that was the advantage I think I had, that audio podcasting works on RSS feeds and not on algorithms. So that helped. And by the time I started doing video, I was way past that stage of saying that, listen, I know that whatever I make is never going to go mass. That's not what I am. I know how to do, or nor do I enjoy doing it. So it kind of worked out nicely for me in that sense, that I got the timing right, luckily.
Wonderful. So since this transformation process, I can say it wasn't a transformation moment, but since this transformation process initiated in your life, say around 6 or 7 years ago, you've dived into multiple, little, if I were to call them projects or different way of leading your life, and you've initiated things which probably the old you might not have done. And one of these happens to be something in the works which hopefully someday gets published. So why don't we hear more about that? Like, how did that happen?
Okay, so while I was on this sabbatical, I said myself that I have 3 months. I'm going to write, and I've always liked writing about travel, and I've written in the past as well. Even before that, I used to run something on Medium where I used to write about my travels, and I said I'm going to write a book, basis the experiences I've had, and when you have that much time, you literally have no excuse left to not do it. And I am decent at sticking to a process. I'm not maybe necessarily the most disciplined person, but if I find a process which works for me, I can stick to the process. The finding the process part is a little difficult for me. It's that how do I set this in my life and how do I find space? But once I do that, I think it's a lot easier for me. And one of the things which I was sitting with discontent largely is that whenever we write about travel and whenever we read travel writing, it is overwhelmingly the positive things you see and feel when you are traveling. But not all travel is like that. And I especially went to places which had been impacted by conflict. Bosnia went through an insane period of conflict in 1992. And of course, the country has come out of it since then. And Armenia, Azerbaijan, border conflicts, and so on. And I realized that I want to use travel as a way to talk about all kinds of emotions. For example, if I look at fear as an emotion, there is an intrinsic fear and there is an extrinsic fear. So intrinsic fear is about things which is which are holding you back from within. That, oh, I can't do this, right? This is too risky, or what will happen if this fails? And there is, of course, extrinsic fear of things or people or situations which are outside of your control. But those are also very real emotions you feel when you are traveling. You're in a new country, you don't speak the language, you don't know anybody, and you are really hoping for the kindness and generosity of people to really carry you through. And of course, hopefully, have your wits around you by the end of it. And that is what really became that each story or a chapter became exploring an emotion. And this will also include things which we don't often think of as emotions. For example, what is home? And that's a question which, if you have moved away from where you grew up and have lived your life significantly in other places or even at a single place, you start thinking about what is home a lot more seriously, because it links to who you are, it links to your identity, it links to as something as simple as how do you introduce yourself to a stranger when you are not at your home. And all of these things became a book which I called Monastery in a Minefield. And the reason for that name is that the demining experience I spoke about was actually on the top of a hill, which used to be a monastery, but it got bombed in the war. It was in ruins. And I felt that navigating life sometimes feels like a minefield. And you have to try to find a monastery, in the sense that even if you're in a minefield, can you find that sense of comfort, stillness, or satisfaction in your life? So I just felt that was like a good name, which was an underlying thing to my project. And the interesting thing is that I actually ended up writing the entire manuscript. I have like 55,000 words written, and it's been sitting with me for the last 7 years. And the reason I feel why I have not published it is not really worried about what people will think of me. And I've at least done half the work. I feel writing a first draft is half the work. The rest half still remains. Is that I realized that writing a book and selling a book are two very different things. And I spoke to authors and they said that if you're just happy with writing it, just publish it. Nobody cares. It will not be read. But if you want it to reach a certain set of people, you are most likely to get something from a publisher if you want to do traditional self-publishing, publishing, if you already have an audience of your own. And I was like, listen, I don't have an audience of my own. And I was like, let it sit where it is. I loved the process of writing it. I still like most of the stuff I have written. Of course, I would change it massively because I have changed as a person in like 6-7 years. And now what interestingly happened is that as this happened, and I was in 2023, I was in Poland traveling. That is when a publisher approached me saying that we want you to do an India travel book for us. And that all happened because of 4-5 years of seeing the kind of work I put out regularly with my podcast and so on. And that became the second book project which I got without having to pitch to publishers and write. And interestingly, I have chosen not to write that book despite having a contract. Because it came back to the point of slowing down to say there are only so many things I can do. Is writing this book at this point in time the most important thing for me to do? And when I honestly looked at it, I said, no, it is not. So while most people would think it's a stupid thing that you have a contract from publishers willing to publish and you're not writing it, but it just does not fit in what I want from my life right now. And which incidentally eventually led me to my third book project, right? Which I am in the process of writing, which is going to be a version of my substack, which I'm writing right now. So again, it puts you on projects and journeys which you don't conceptualize. But for all of them to happen, you have to give yourself the permission to say that I'm going to try this out. What podcasting really gave me was to say that, oh, I can learn anything and become good at it over a period of time. And while theoretically, we all know this, right? there are new people in the world who are born every day and they learn incredibly complicated things and do amazing things. But we forget that as an adult to say that, oh, we can also do this because we have all these ideas about ourselves. We have these ideas of who we are and we have fixed identities. And for me, that has also been a journey I have been on, which has allowed me to dive into newer projects, allowed me to say, oh, I like doing this, let me try and do this, which has led me to pick up sketching, which has led me to pick up watercolors, which has led me to start writing this substack, which is essentially about a millennial's thoughts of navigating midlife and asking all those questions, saying that I'm going to be 40 next year. What do I want the next 20, 30, 40 years of my life to look like? And the answer is not what some part of at least my previous life looked like. I want to change that way. I want to chart what I can possibly do and be very realistic about it. So not just philosophizing for the sake of it, but philosophy with lived experience to say, yes, of course, I need to make money. I need to be financially independent. I need to be healthy. I need to care about my the people in my life and my relationships and all those things. But outside of that, what do I want to do which occupies a certain degree and a certain amount of my time? So that's been the whole thing with the book project which started out then, and how it has just gone from one thing to the other.
One of the threads which I've been hearing, while you've been talking about these different lived experiences, is the ability to say no, right? And it sounds very nice to me that you have exercised that option where you chose not to publish your first book, right? Where you chose to refuse the other book for which a publisher, which is like a dream situation, right? A publisher reaching out to you and you're like, okay, I'll drop everything in the world and I'm going to do this, right? You chose not to, go down the path of exploring how to make my podcast extremely popular and who should I tell talk to it about and where do I go and what do I do, things like that, right? So you chose to say no to the algorithm, right? And while these are great to hear, but these are very these decisions, the decision making process creates tremendous amount of conflict internally. And talk us through the process of arriving at such kind of decisions, what really happens inside you. Or I'm sure you've not turned into a monk by now, wherein you don't you don't feel it as much as other human beings do. But talk us through the process of saying no.
So one of the principles I have is the idea of thin and thick desires. I'm not sure if you have come across it, so I'll just take a minute to.
Can you repeat that?
The idea of thin and thick desires. And what I mean by that, so this is from a philosopher named René Girard, and I discovered it through a writer named Luke Burgess. And what he talks about thin and thick desires is that thin desires are desires you have because other people value them. Whereas thick desires are desires which are intrinsic to you, which give you some joy and satisfaction and meaning. Now, all of us have both, and both need to be satiated. The general way our psychology and our society works is that we are asked to put a huge amount of value on thin desires because you should appear successful in front of other people, because there is a huge amount of social capital you can build through that, and it can be advantageous to you in life as you go along, which is true. It's not that it is untrue. But the fundamental disconnect which I have with having too many thin desires is that social capital actually is not useful to you because, one, you can't exercise it, and second, that is not necessarily the kind of people you want to have a significant say in your life or have a significant role in your life. So whenever I am, you know, seeing a decision which is a significant decision which I need to take, and I have an answer, I try to ask myself this: that is it this a thin desire for me, or is this a thick desire for me? So getting published is a thin desire. Writing is a thick desire. So I feel now I'm trying to, tease apart those threads a little bit more to say that, do I want to be a published author and get that identity and get that title, or do I want to really spend time going deep into writing something and of course publish it? There's no question about it. But the desire to write that has to come first, and the publishing bit has to come secondary. So that is one way I think of it. The other way is to think of it from a time shifted perspective, is to say, if I don't do this today, will I regret it a week later, a year later, and 5 years later? If you strongly feel you're going to regret this 5 years later, maybe this is a good idea for you to do. But if you feel even a year later it's not going to make a very big difference to your life, then it's okay to let it go. That is another way sometimes I think. Of course, it's not as linear as I'm speaking right now. It's always a jumble of things. But I find some of these principles useful to go back to, because it allows you to sometimes step outside of yourself and say that, am I really getting carried away with this thing of what it could mean to the world more than what it could mean to me? So yes, it causes conflict. It causes some amount of ferment within me. But more often than not, I have always felt that a few weeks or months after the decision is taken, I am still at peace with that decision. So it's sort of a feedback loop which says this is not a bad process. This is a decent process which serves you well. And maybe you should stick to it. And once in a while, every decision goes wrong. And that's just part of life. You have to accept it. So maybe some ways that how I think.
So another related emotional decision to this. So first decision is saying no to something, therefore clearing out space to do something which is probably what you want to chase from a long-term perspective. The other equally important question over here is the question of yes, you are still someone who has to make a practical decision, right? There is money involved. There is a life that you are building. There is a career involved, right? So between being swept away by what feels the right thing to do and what you're feeling an internal calling for, and at the same time being able to lead a life and a career and an income source and all, how much of it is a part of your decision making process?
So financial decisions are of course important and critical to think about, but at the same time there is a realization that no amount of money is ever enough. That enough line has to come from you. Like to this date, and I'm sure you've lived a certain amount of your life in India. At 39, I don't own a car. I'm a director in a company, by which means a lot of people expect that you should own a car. I drive a scooter to office. And I buy, maybe one pair of clothes a year or something like that. And it's not saying that I am some sort of stoic person or I have some great realization, but I've just realized that I don't really see the space and point of these things in my life. And one very good way to also, I have thought of it is, there's this old Hindi film song ki kuch to log kahenge, logo ka kaam hai kehna, which is to say that no matter what you do, people will always have something to say, is true, right? So if that is anyways the case, why should I worry so much that, people will say something and people will, want to say something? So there is that aspect of it. that once you understand that there is, you need to draw a line of satisfaction for you to say that this is enough for me, right? And this is enough in terms of living a lifestyle which I like, and also enough in terms of having financial security for the future, to have enough money to invest, save, etc., and so on. Now, the advantage is that if you're able to define that baseline, you have defined the bounds of your problem. And that is one of the most important things to do when you're trying to take a decision or have a problem, is to say, this is what I absolutely need. Now, when I think of that, how it helps me is to say, oh, I can say no to this and still be able to meet the bounds I need to meet. Right? The decision is immediately simplified. But without those bounds, you're always going to say, yes, more is good. And that makes the decision harder. So it's all different links in a chain, but it helps if you are able to define those bounds.
Beautiful. So I'll ask you one last question since we are on this thread. So, yes, you have a philosophy of a certain way of life that you want to lead, which is with intentionality, and lead it slowly. You have started manifesting this philosophy into your life in the form of being able to say no and therefore clear out space to say yes. You have also built a practical way of looking at these decisions, wherein there are certain basic financial, non-negotiables, or a framework to evaluate decisions exists, right? Now, what happens when the universe decides to throw a surprise that completely throws everything out of the window, and almost like a slap on the face from the universe? Have you had such moments, and what has been your process of recovery, or where are you in this journey?
So I feel that I have not had any major such moments. Of course, there have been some things which have happened. For me, the best way to deal with it is go back and redefine the bounds. So, for example, at a very small level, I have not produced an episode of my podcast for, I think, the last 3 or 4 months, because there has been a lot of other stuff which has been happening, in my life, thankfully all positive, to which I say, okay, I'm going to slightly shift my bounds till I come to another stable state, and then reevaluate whether I want to do it. That has helped me, because I almost think of it like how customer service is about setting expectations and delivering on those expectations. Life is also almost about that. Is to say, what expectations are you setting for yourself, which you can then fulfill and feel good about yourself. So, for example, I got diagnosed with a bunch of health issues. I had elevated blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, back issues, gout, a whole bunch of things. And that's when I realized my bounds have to change. I now have to consciously make time for exercise in my life. Now it's a non-negotiable, which means I have to now let go of some things which I probably like doing a lot more and change that. If I did not do the renegotiation with myself, then what I'm doing is I'm constantly going through cycles of expectation and not meeting expectation, not meeting expectation, which is very frustrating internally. So it's also good to then go back and tell yourself that there is no fixed idea of who you are as a person. And the line I like to use is, you have to play the cards you are dealt. You will not always be able to choose the cards you want to play. So if you accept that there will be cards which will not be in your favor, and you see your life as a bunch of card games in which some of them you will win big and some of them you will just fold and walk away, it takes away a lot of the angst and the pressure on you, and it helps you also probably be okay with, if not necessarily enjoy what you are going through, but try to make your peace with it, and not let it overwhelm you completely.
So, if I'm understanding you right, and I cannot understand you in such a short conversation, so let me confess that first. But if I'm understanding a few of the things about you right, you seem to be a person who takes the time to think through decisions, who considers it, who tries to create a frame, and if the frame becomes irrelevant when it comes to a separate decision, you redefine what that frame for decision making should be. And which gets me thinking that, what kind of a routine do you lead? Like, where do you find such space from? Because that seems to be, a general lack of time and space is a common theme for most people leading their lives today, between high pressure jobs, uh, combined with long travel and commute times, combined with family and social commitments, combined with, at best, getting to play a badminton game or a few hours of cricket at best on a weekend, if you don't have kids, is the pattern that most life seems to be. And here is someone like you who is not just leading a life that you wanted to lead, but is also doing 100 other things. Like, how are you carving out space in a very practical day-to-day routine format? Like, because over there also, I'm sure something has to give in. Like, you have to evolve in some way. So tell us about that.
So for me, the last couple of years has been a space where health has been a priority. So I said, this is my non-negotiable now. I cannot, have it go on the back burner anymore. And it helps that I'm a morning person. So I ensure that I'm working out 4 to 5 times a week, between an hour and a half every day. Now that helps in two ways. I never have to think about what I'm going to do in the morning when I get up, because it's already decided for me. I absolutely despise working out. I'm not a person who likes it. So what I have done, and of course, the advantages of living in India, I'm working with a yoga teacher who will come to my doorstep. And then I'm literally like, it is embarrassing to say no to someone who has turned to your doorstep. So you can't say, I'm not feeling like it today. Initially, I thought, okay, maybe I'll go to a yoga class nearby, or I'll do it online. I have tried all of that, nothing has worked. So I have accepted that, listen, I am shit at this. So let me hand over the reins of control to someone I trust, who will make sure that I need to do what I need to do. That has helped immensely. Because of that, my cholesterol issue is gone, my back issue is largely gone, and a couple of other issues in terms of I'm fixing through diet now. So the same thing very recently, this is just 3 months ago, I said, I have tried everything, I love food and it's a problem. I'm going to hire a dietitian who's going to put me on a plan. And as I said, I don't know how to find a process, but once I find it, I can stick to it. So I'm like, no, I'm giving you the reins to you now. You will decide how I'm going to eat and change my relationship with food in the long term, so that I can continue doing this myself. Now, once that becomes, it actually takes away a lot of anxiety from my life, which means it opens up mind space. Because now I am saying I am doing what I need to do. Great. I feel good about myself. I feel I've exercised some agency. Okay, great. Now let's think of the other things which I need to do. So the good thing about having a job is you have to do it. There's no question. But there also I have taken some conscious choices. Like I've moved away from running a P&L in my previous role to more individual contributor role, which of course reduces the number of tasks you have to do. You still have to deliver on outcomes, which goes with any job. And but that, I think sometimes time is also a question of mental space more than just the physical time of it. So for example, if you're mentally occupied and you have an hour between two meetings, you might end up not utilizing it effectively, because you are literally like, trying to do tasks which absolutely don't need to be done now.
Yeah.
So, and it's not that you're being efficient. You are like, I can't do anything in meaningful in 1 hour. Let me just do these small things, etc. So that ways I'm trying to free up my mental space. The other thing is, of course, conscious decisions. One big thing which I'm fortunate my wife and I are aligned on, that we don't want to have kids. And while we have both very different reasons, luckily the point of decision is the same for us. And that, of course, allows you to live a certain kind of life. Having said that, there are enough people out there who do what they want to do despite having kids. So it's not that kids becomes a barrier, but of course it simplifies a lot of things and how you want to live. The other choice I took very consciously about 4 5 years ago is I don't watch anything on Netflix or Amazon Prime or anything of that sort. I've not done it for 5 years. And yes, there are conversations, social conversations, in which I'm just like looking at it like a tennis match between people. Okay, you're saying this, you are saying this. I have zero idea what they're talking about. Apart from, of course, the names which I hear here and there. And that's a great trade-off, in my opinion, because it easily frees up 4 to 5 hours in a week for me. Easy. Like, I don't binge watch anything or anything of that sort. Now, the moment you're able to open up so much free time, you start feeling that you can do some of the things which you like to do. You can start taking some of those random bets, saying, okay, I'll just start sketching. That's how I literally started my newsletter, is to say that, oh, there are these things I'm kind of thinking about and I should write about it somewhere. Okay, let me start a newsletter. Now, when I started the newsletter, I realized that, oh, if I add a visual element to this, I can do long form, because, a visual thing sort of give you a break from reading text. And now that I'm using it as an excuse to make sure I sketch and I watercolor. Okay, I have to write one piece a month because that's the most I can write for long form. How can I incorporate my sketching and watercolor practice into it so that not only the writing becomes better, but also I'm giving myself some bounds to say, I have to do this much. This is the minimum I have to do today. And now that also flows into how you think about money, because on some of these things, I literally just bought watercolors worth $4,000 the other day, which I am completely happy to do because I feel it contributes to my practice and it will help me become a better artist in some ways, because the tools are important. And while most important is what you do, but the tools are also important. So that is where I don't mind spending the money. And that is money which I know that I will never ever regret spending. So sometimes it's about reducing the number of decisions you want to take. So I don't have to think about what I'm going to do in the morning. I have a routine now. And because I start a yoga class at 6:30. So I have to be up by, let's say, 6 to be able to do that 6:30, which means I have to be able to sleep at 10 because I love sleeping. So I'm like, I'm not going to compromise on my sleep. I don't care for anything. So like, if I have to be in bed by 10, I have to eat at a reasonable hour. Now, it just becomes a chain of events, which after some resistance, you are like, wait, this is the right thing to do. As much as I would want to be like, oh, let me watch up late and, do some doom scrolling on Instagram, which I still do. But at least not in the night. Now I do it in the day. But my sleep is protected now, which is very important to me, which means my rest is protected, which means I am able to actually go into my yoga practice with energy and not, crying, oh my God, what I am doing, why am I doing this? Which I do, by the way, in the yoga practice, because there are times I'm like, why am I doing this? This is not worth it. But at the end of every workout, everybody feels great. That is the reality of working out, right? So, yes, there is a lot of intentionality in it. But the other intentionality I want to think about a lot more as I go ahead in my life is, can I have chunks of time where I have nothing planned? That I can just do whatever I want. Like, I don't want to live such a regimented life that everything is by the calendar. So my non-negotiables have to be by calendar. That is now not an option anymore. I don't think I have the luxury of it. But if a friend pings who lives nearby that, oh, I'm dropping by to your place, let's catch up for coffee, I want to be able to do that once in a while. And I don't want spontaneity to completely move away from my life. At the same time, I don't want to completely be defined by the whims and fancies of either other people or algorithms in that sense to decide what kind of life I want to live. I have no idea if that answers your question, but I hope it does in some way.
I've been trying so hard in this conversation to find one loophole in your way of leading life. Like, I'm trying so hard to trip you through all these different questions that, maybe this constraint is something that you wouldn't have thought of or you wouldn't have encountered, or this constraint will throw you off. But you seem to have figured out a way around all of this.
No. I will tell you all the loopholes if you want to hear them. I am very happy to share these things. And I'll give you a very simple example. Right, I started a weekend course with a friend called the 6% Club, where we help people launch their creative projects on the side. So this is for people who have full-time work. They just want to do something on the side, not necessarily make it a full-time thing and all those things. Like this conversation we are having, right? Now, there are so many things in the way I run that course which could easily be optimized, which I can simplify for my life. But I'm like, hey, I'm not going to do this. Yeah, this feels like too much effort. And it's a one-time effort. I don't need to do it. But even that one-time effort, I'm not willing to take. Because I'm like, wait, but sketching right now seems like a lot more fun. Let me just do that. Right? So it's not that this is a very well thought out system or structure. I would say it works most of the time. And it does not work sometimes at all.
So since you mentioned 6% Club, let's talk about that. Like, it's a very interesting project that you started. Tell us all about it.
So it really started because over time, with my friend whose podcast I first appeared on, and he's been a podcaster for long. He also wrote a marketing newsletter and so on. We had people who had come to ask us that, listen, I want to start a podcast. I want to do something like the creative project. How do I get started? How do you guys manage this with work, etc., and so on? So one day I told him that, listen, let's just put together a weekend course, because we at least have 10, 15 people within our own circles who have asked us this. And while you have sat them down for half an hour and talked them through it, it needs a lot more thinking and prep and so on. So once we decided that, we were like, okay, let's do it with 10 people. And we decided, okay, let's do it properly. Let's put our website and everything, not just like an email blast to friends and family and stuff. So we put a developer, got onto a website, and then we launched it. And 80 people signed up for it instead of 10. And we were like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to manage this? So many questions. He runs a content and design studio with his partner. I have a full-time job. And we are like, of course, this was a weekend course because it was working professional. So it was always going to be weekends. But it just became one of those things that, how are you going to manage this? And then again, through the same thing about bounds. Okay, this course doesn't have to be perfect, right? We will do the best we can. And we said that upfront whenever someone was signing up, that this is an experiment. We don't know how it will go. And we said 100% money back guarantee. If you, at the end of it, you feel this was time wasted, I'll give you your money back. Yeah, I'm okay with it. And since then, this was April 2024, a year and a month now. We have finished. I'm finishing 5th cohort this month. I'm signing up for 6th cohort now. It has taken a life of its own because somewhere we realized, and this is again, only if you try, some things exist, that there are enough people out there who are wanting to do something creative, but just don't find the time, the structure, the mentorship, and maybe just the focus to be able to get down and, doing it. And you have been through that journey yourself, that you have to make it a priority in your life to be able to do this. Otherwise, it will never happen. Right? So since then, it has, we have, and one of the biggest advantages of running something like this, especially saying this someone who's in his 30s and going to be in his 40s, is it's so hard to meet new people. It's how to make new friends, how to meet with people who think like you and who see the world like you do. And the 6% Club has been that for us because we are meeting such thoughtful, creative, intelligent people coming from backgrounds which I have no understanding of. I've had a Harvard physician scientist who's launching a podcast on metabolism in South Asia, something as specific and as as a space of expertise. I have someone who was a wildlife photographer and he started his own YouTube channel about wildlife videos. I've had someone who is uh, a person who has seen domestic abuse and moved away from that relationship, and she now documents the stories of other women who are going through it or have gotten out of it to give them hope that there is a possibility of getting out of it. Completely different motivations, completely different reasons to do things, but a very strong desire to bring something out in the world. And when you are able to engage with people like that on a regular basis in your life, it also fills you with so much creative energy and space. It shows you that, listen, there are so many people out there doing so many interesting things despite all the constraints they have. And of course, I'm talking from a space of privilege. These are also privileged people. So there's no question about that, that I'm only talking about the privileged set of people we have. But at the same time, there are also so many other privileged people who don't do these things despite having a desire to do it. So what started off as an experiment and a weekend thing has grown into something which is now a very significant part of our life, monetarily, from a mental space perspective, from a physical time perspective. And I can only expect it to, see it and grow from here, because I'm getting the ability to be with someone for 2 months, build a one-on-one connection with them, uh, have them give me the privilege that they are willing to be vulnerable in front of me and talk about their challenges, about the mental blocks they are having as creators and what they feel stuck with in their life. And I have the this great advantage of saying that, oh, I have figured some of these things out, I can actually help you with this. So for me, that is a great way to live your life in that sense. And it also gives me an opportunity to say that not only this opens other opportunities, but even if I just continue to do this much for the next few years, it's going to be rewarding in so many ways. And that's roughly been the journey of what we have been trying to do at 6% Club.
I want to reopen one more thread. In the beginning, you mentioned, very casually about your podcast, which is on travel, culture, and history. And you forgot to mention that this podcast became the top 2% on Spotify globally.
Yeah.
And I want to understand from you, what was that process like? What was the unlock for you in terms of a realization from that project? And before you started getting Spotify reaching out to you and other people reaching out to you, talk to us about your journey of doing that.
So the answer is very boring. The answer is consistently showing up. When people say that success is 90% time showing up, I think it's actually very, very true. So my podcast became a global top 2% podcast, not necessarily because I made the best content out there. I mean, I'm proud of what I made. I still stand by it and I enjoy it and I value it. But also because I gave people a chance every week to become their habit. And that is what makes a podcast do well, is it is someone's habit. And that meant showing up every week in ways which is true to me, which is authentic to me. And of course, I made some decisions which helped the podcast grow. For example, I did a series on food, history and food and India and so on, and that did very well. So I said, okay, I'll do one more series on food. Now, for me, that kind of a decision was good because I was getting to do more of what I enjoyed and people still liked it. So I'm like, okay, there is no creative trade-off I need to make here. And when you realize that, if you're able to find something which other people like in something you're already doing, it is just so easy to do it more of it. Because it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like strain. It doesn't feel like a task. And that process for me was important because I was never married to the outcome. I was married to the input. And that is useful because anything you start, the outcomes are going to be terrible in the beginning. I mean, you started a company I'm sure you've gone through your own set of challenges and failures, and literally feels like, oh, I was doing so well. Now nobody wants to hire me as an independent person, versus in agencies, everyone wanted to work with me, and so on. The same thing happened here, right? That in the beginning, nobody cared. But by the virtue of doing the work and showing up, you start becoming better at your craft. You start becoming better at what you do. You're able to understand how to do things in a more interesting way, in a more you way, in a way which keeps the audience in mind without moving away from what you want to do. And that, honestly, for me, really came together very, very strongly in the substack I started writing. Because the article which I published last month uh, really took off. And I put a lot of work in it. And of course, I'm very happy with it, even when I did not expect it to anyway take off, because nothing till this point I had done as a creator had ever remotely gone viral. And this is what I always want to tell people who are creators, is that virality is the exception, it is not the norm. And if you set your expectation to the exception, you will always be disappointed in whatever you are doing. Now, because of that piece going viral, and I'm talking about a 30-minute long form piece being read 150,000 times for an individual creator who otherwise has no distribution on a platform like Substack. All that happened because I put in those 5 years of work of showing up and writing every week and improving my storytelling, improving my craft, and then taking so many of those influences and putting it together in the long form stuff which I do on Substack today. So the way I think of that entire thing is, think of running life as an infinite relay race, where your previous self hands the baton to your current self so that you can run and hand the baton to your future self. And it's like a series of things which never ends. But if you do not let your previous self start running, the present and the future don't exist. They will start taking a completely different race and a different path. So for me, the 2% happening is really consistency. I have done zero marketing for it, not because I did not want to, because I'm lazy and I'm shit at it. And I'm the kind of person who would even bother to put one Instagram post of my own podcast. Just the absolute basic thing to do, right? I would send it to some WhatsApp groups and some friends and here and there and all those things. Of course I did, but no significant efforts toward marketing. I did have an advantage of being with a podcast network, so did of course get some of their audiences. But you ultimately have to retain your audience. Your audience can sample you, but if you don't do consistent, you don't do good work, no one's going to be staying with you, as a creator. So for me, that journey has been useful to say that you can become top 2% in anything if you are willing to stay with it. And top 2% is good enough, I would say even great enough for most things in life.
So I'll put in my last ditch effort to try and challenge your way of living currently, right? You had a very different way of living earlier, and then you started on this journey 6 or 7 years ago. And now one more way of looking at your life, as you have been explaining the details, is that you're doing your job, albeit as an individual contributor as opposed to, say, a P&L leader. So you still have your job, you still have your family, you still have the travel which is going on, you still have the podcast about the travel, you still have, the
6% club.
The 6% club. You still have all these other, the long form Substack that you have started.
Yeah.
And in the middle of all of this, you are still trying to take care of your health, and you're doing your yoga, and you're fixing your food. And on top of that, you're trying to sketch and you're trying to draw and use that for your, your Substack, and trying to write multiple books at the same time. So this is already a very crowded life, right?
Yes.
How have you really improved your life if you have crowded up your life with different things as opposed to, say, your life earlier? In what qualitative way is it a significantly better life?
Great question. Uh, Also, one of the reasons why the previous two books are not being written. Also, the reason why the podcast has been on break for 4 months, because every few months you evaluate, is it becoming too much? You are like, yeah, okay, let's pause something, right? So that is definitely happening. In terms of qualitatively, the way I think about is that if you think of our lives from a day-to-day perspective, nothing changes between yesterday and today. But when you look back a year in retrospect, a lot has changed. So, qualitatively, I have given myself multiple opportunities to change the way and become the person I want to become, which wouldn't have been possible in my previous life. So, one of the things I want to do going forward in my life is to always be involved in some sort of a creative project. It was a podcast earlier, it is a substack now. I don't know, maybe I'll some point I'll stop writing and only move to doing sketching and watercoloring. I don't know at any point what it's going to look like. But what I've given myself is the permission to try new things, to chase my curiosities, and at least try and define the kind of life I would like to live. So qualitatively, that has been the biggest shift for me.
Wonderful. Is there some question that I should have asked you, or is there something else that you wanted to talk about which I haven't asked you yet?
There is one thing I do want to talk about, which is to say that any change you want in your life on any parameter, the only way to really do it is to take the smallest step towards it. The problem with most changes in life is that they are hard to do and they seem very big. But if you are able to break it down into many small steps, it becomes very doable. So, my journey of being healthy is something which I learned from my yoga teacher. He says that you don't think about how much work do you need to do. You just think about showing up for the next class. That's it. And let the journey of it take care of itself. Because he said that is what is fundamentally in your control as a human being, is to take that small action. So, one good way to break this anxiety cycle, which so many of us are in terms of, oh, I want to make some change, I've not been able to make a change, is to say, take the smallest step possible, which is possible for you in your current situation. I don't want to, I am actually not a biggest fan of productivity hacks and all these things, because I am like, everybody's life context is different. Everybody's mental space and challenges are different. So you should take the smallest step which is possible for you, because that breaks that cycle. Action breaks the anxiety cycle. We said, okay, I tried a little bit. I chose not to have dessert today after dinner. That really helps more than, even a 30-minute exercise could help, because you're cutting down on calories. So I'm saying whatever that is in your life. And this is what I also tell folks at 6% Club. I'm like, just start your project. Don't worry about how good or bad it is. I'm telling you it's going to be bad in the beginning. But if you don't start, the rest of the journey is not possible. So just take that smallest step, whatever that is in your life, and you will be surprised how things will turn out. So that's the only thing I wanted to sort of, think we did not really cover in a very direct way. Because that's how at least I have found it useful for myself to do things.
Brilliant. So before I leave, the one thing that I'm wondering, and this is just like some part of me which wants to hear this answer, is that, say if you were to meet up with a bunch of strangers at a social event or a party or something, and before you make any deep conversations, it's still in that small talk phase. How do you introduce yourself these days? Like because typically the tendency is that you define yourself by the job that you're doing or something of that sort. So I'm curious, how do you introduce yourself?
So my introduction varies by the audience. It's not the same. So if it is, of course, I'm meeting in a work context, then of course it's about work. But I'm meeting in a social context. If it's people I don't know, I usually start with the fact that I'm running 6% club, or I like traveling, or I like sketching and watercoloring, because it often gives the other person also an opening to ask me something. And basis the question they ask, it gives me an opening to understand what this person is and what I want to know from them, what kind of conversation I want to have with them. Because the moment I open with the work conversation, the other person also tends to open with the work conversation, and then the conversation takes a certain kind of a cadence, which I don't particularly enjoy, because I feel we all have so many aspects of ourselves, as my favorite podcaster Amit Verma says, we contain multitudes. So defining ourselves by our job is actually a disservice to ourselves as human beings, because while a job is important, it's a very significant part of your life, not just from a monetary perspective, but also from what we spend our time on. It cannot be your only identity, and it should not be your only identity, if that's what when you might want it so well. Who am I to say you can't do it? But yeah, I wouldn't like that, and that's how I introduce myself.
Awesome. Utsav, it has been absolutely fabulous having you talk about your journey. It has been fabulous to dive into these, the various lived experiences, the lessons that you have drawn, the way you have changed the course of your life, and how being slow has actually allowed you to do more and qualitatively better things in life. So it was an absolute joy listening to your story, and hope people who are in similar phases in life pick up a thread or a two which helps them in their own journeys as well.
Thank you, Rahul, for having me and helping me drone on for 1.5 hours. So thanks for the opportunity, and I had a great time talking to you.
Awesome. Let's continue this conversation at a different point with some other topic with you.
Sounds good.